Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of our Jack Westin MCAT podcast, and specifically a CARS reading skills workshop. In episodes like this, we're going to go through one of our Jack Westin Daily CARS passages. This one is called Old Folks' Homes from January 7th. And we're going to read it sentence by sentence and talk about what the key arguments are that the author is providing that teach us about their perspective and will ultimately help us the most with these questions. Now, Jack, this passage is kind of a fun one. I feel like we get a lot of really direct arguments in this one. I'm
Yeah, this
excited
is
to talk about it.
right. I think this is the kind of passage everyone wants on their test, right? Like
Yes.
if nine passages come up like this, I don't think anyone's going to be complaining, right? So it's pretty
Yes.
direct, pretty straightforward, easy to read. I think yeah, it's going to be a pleasant one for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. Pretty conversational, which is always nice.
Right,
You get one of these every once in a while sandwiched between incredibly dense passages, and it's like a breath of fresh air.
right.
Although
Still,
sometimes the questions are hard.
right. And so a lot of the principles that we've been learning and attempting on each passage is still applicable to this one as well, right? It's just
Yes.
much more obvious when we read.
Mhm.
So, which is nice.
And that's nice. I feel
Yeah.
like not to, diss this passage, but it's kind of like before you ride a bike, you want to have training wheels. You want to see the same principles, the same activity applied to something that's slightly easier to keep your balance on. I feel like
Exactly.
that's this.
Right. Right.
Not that it's not a valuable passage, it is. It's an incredibly valuable passage, and I feel like that's why. Um, Okay, well, let's hop in with it. Again, it's called Old Folks Homes. It's from January 7th. If you're not listening to this on January 7th, you can find the link to the passage in the description. If you are, you could go to jackweston.com. It's right on the front page of our homepage. You'll see our daily passages. Okay, so let's hop in with first sentence of paragraph one. And it says the building industry has caught on to the fact that America's fast growing elderly population represents a lucrative niche market. Okay, so pretty direct. It's kind of weird to describe the elderly population as a lucrative niche market, but that is the argument, right? At least within the building sphere or realm or industry. So the elderly population are this lucrative niche market for building. That's a
Right.
pretty direct argument right out of the gate.
Right. We don't know exactly what they're trying to serve the elderly, but we do know that, it does say building industry, right? So
Yeah.
they're building something, maybe building wise, like for the elderly, okay. But it also says lucrative, which is meaning what? Like they're gonna try to make money off
Yeah,
the
money.
elderly? Okay. Yeah,
Hmm.
sounds good. So that gives us a lot of clarity. And also it's an argument because someone might argue that the elderly population is not a lucrative market, right? It's all relative to what we think is lucrative. So in this
Yeah,
case, it's an opinion and we should track it.
for sure. All right. For more than a decade, builders have been churning out efficient, streamlined communities for golden agers and active adults. So that kind of clarifies a little bit. Not really an argument. This is more of a fact, right? But it's helping us understand why this might be a lucrative market when it comes to building, right? So they're building communities for the elderly population,
Got it.
presumably that they have to pay to move into.
Yeah, that clarified it. It's communities. Okay, I can think of that, right? Old community, community housing for older people. Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, but much of the housing built for residents age 65 and older remains a depressing wasteland of leisure worlds and sandy acres subdivisions, planned developments where older adults are put out to pasture and cut off from the social patterns they've known all their lives. Whoa. We get the but, and then this is so tone heavy. This is a very direct argument and it's very clear how the author feels about these communities, right? It's a depressing wasteland where we're put out to pasture and cut off. Like, tell me how you really feel,
Right,
author.
right. That sounds super negative towards this, right?
Yes.
So, okay, so the tone is established. The author's pretty extreme about it. Great. Okay, and we know the direction the author's headed in. I highly doubt, since this was so straightforward and it doesn't associate with any person or other society. The author is very direct in telling us this. I highly doubt that the author will change gears in this
Yeah.
passage, right?
Yeah.
If you would expect the author to change gears potentially if the author brought up other people to bring up this claim, right? So and so said, or we as a whole believe this, right? This doesn't come off that way. This comes off as this is my opinion. This is what I believe. And so I love reading this kind of sentence because I know that the rest of this passage is probably going to be consistent with this, knowing how the author has presented this information.
Absolutely. Yeah, maybe we'll add new layers to it, but
Right,
you're right. I don't believe that we're going to get like a total U-turn. Actually, these communities are amazing and everyone should live in it. Like they just
right,
called it a depressing wasteland. Like
right. There's
it's pretty cut and
Yeah.
dry.
We have to see if the author says maybe there's a way we could fix the issue.
Yes.
Maybe there's an alternative. Maybe we should just completely forget these older communities. We have to see. But the author has made it very clear how he or she feels about this. So great.
Agreed. Okay. And while low income housing for the elderly is often overly rigid and institutional, upscale housing for affluent elderly residents can be even more vulgar in its imagery and predictability. Okay, I feel like that's pretty much the same thing, right? It's either overly rigid and institutional or even more vulgar, right? Again, very negative tone words, pretty direct. Author does not believe that these communities are good, right? The other has a pretty negative tone towards it. So it's depressing. It's a depressing wasteland, this elderly housing market.
Right. There you go.
Awesome. So, Jack, what do you think we want to track from this? Obviously, the depressing wasteland. Do you think we care about the first sentence that was an argument?
I think it's establishing what we're talking about, but I don't think it's the most important argument. I doubt they're ever going to test you on that. I think they're going to test you more on the second argument that comes after the contrast word, right? Which is something we've learned time in and time out. They deeply care about ideas that come after contrast words because that's where they're headed. And so
Yeah.
the idea I think that we should all know is that design for elderly housing is depressing, right? It's a wasteland. And so let's see how the author wants to remedy this problem, right? This opinion that they have.
Yeah. All right, let's move into P2. It says the biggest problem with housing for seniors is that much of it has been designed as if the market were one monolithic gray block and as if all older people had the same needs and desires. Okay. So it sounds like we're pretending or we're basically acting as if everyone needs the same thing. Everyone wants and needs the same thing, or
Is
at
this
least these older people.
Molly, do you think this is a new argument or is this consistent with the depressing wasteland idea that was brought up before?
So it's a good question. I think that this is a new layer to that argument, right? I do think it's distinct. We're not just saying that it's depressing,
Right.
right? We're explaining partially why it's depressing, right? Potentially. I think it relates, but I think it's worth tracking as its own idea, right? Because we're
Yeah.
saying that
Yeah.
I mean, the monolithic gray block kind of sounds like depressing wasteland. I feel like these ideas kind of go hand in hand. However, saying that the biggest problem is that we treat everyone the same in terms of their needs and desires, I think that's distinct and I think it's something that we should track.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is what a lot of students struggle with is they'll find a really important idea in the previous paragraph and they'll blanket future paragraphs off that idea. Now, there is definitely some consistency here, right? Like the idea of how the design for elderly housing is depressing is very much aligned with this paragraph, at least in the beginning. But this paragraph is more specific, and our job is to find the specific points the author is making, right? This is distinct because it's talking about how elderly housing designed as if all old people have the same needs, right? And so the author has a problem with that. That's obvious. Like the author doesn't like that. That's an assumption we can make, right? Because of what was said before. So in this case, I would keep track of this idea. I would understand that yes, to some extent, we're still saying there's problems with the design, but it's giving us clarity as to what those problems are, why they come up, right? It's because they're not really thinking about older people and how they may have different needs, right? And in this case, they think they have the same needs and desires. So that's an issue for the author. Okay.
Yes. Okay. And then we get, but that's not the case, stresses architect Victor A. Regnier, Dean of the Architecture School at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and author of Assisted Living Housing for the Elderly, Design Innovations from the United States and Europe. Okay, so as we've talked about, it feels that the author, does not love this perspective of everyone's got the same needs. We've already established in P1 that the author feels that this is depressing and, not a positive thing. It sounds like Regnier, this architect, also doesn't think that this is a good thing, specifically with the needs and desires being the same. So
Okay, got
they're
it.
giving us, huh?
Got it. So I was so I could see a student reading this and being confused by,
Yeah.
but that's not the case. So what is not the case? What,
The
like
older people all have the same needs and desires.
exactly, which is something that we know because the author said that's the biggest problem, right? So the author
Exactly.
says that's the biggest problem, and the author's saying, well, it's not the case that they all have the same needs and desires, right? So this is still consistent with what we've been saying. This is not challenging what the author said in the previous paragraph. It's just expanding on it because it's the way it's written. The author is trying to challenge what people may think, right? That people may think that they need the same needs and desires, but that's not the case, right? There's more to it than that.
Exactly. Yeah,
Okay,
and this individual Regnier also seems to believe that. They seem to be on the same page.
okay, great.
Okay. Our long-term care, this is a quote. Our long-term care system appears single-minded, inflexible, and uncoordinated. The classic one shoe fits all mentality, end quote, Regnier observes. So this is a quote from that same individual we were talking about who very clearly feels that one size does not fit all. Okay. So same thing that we really said in our last sentence. And this is another quote. We're continuing this. So it suffers from a lack of imaginative ideas that integrate the family and community in caregiving. So again, it's not sufficient. What we're doing is not working very well. The quote continues for one more sentence. We need to try different types and sizes of settings to better understand what works effectively for a diverse group of older people with a diverse range of needs. Okay, this sentence feels more like a call to action, like we need to try more stuff. But ultimately, it's still the same idea with Regnier that ultimately was originally claiming that they don't all have the same needs and desires. So I think we're still pretty much with that same argument. Originally, housing is designed as if everyone has the same needs and desires, but that's not true. And they have a diverse range of needs, which
That's it.
Rainier is associated with.
That's it. That's great.
Perfect. That was P2. We're moving into P3 already. Again, I feel like this passage is it's not easy, but it's a easier read given how much um like tone heavy words we have, how direct the passage is so far.
Right. And the author wrote it in a very clear way, right? So it all follows well. Like, oh, okay, we're talking about housing, community housing for elderly. Oh, there's a problem. It's a depressing wasteland the way they design it. Oh, why is it depressing? Okay, it's so like they're so mundane, like they just focus on the same needs and desires. They think that's what everyone wants. Actually, that's not the case, right? They all have different needs and desires and things. So
Yeah.
that's very easy to follow, right? Not
Yeah.
so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, this author would get an A plus in debate class. It's
Right.
very direct. It's very clear. Some authors need a little help making their
Right.
points clear. But yeah, this has been pretty clear so far, which is nice. Okay, P3. Experts in gerontology and occupational therapy argue that designing environments for aging individuals means designing for people with a wide range of abilities, not one average user. Okay. Jack, I mean, this feels kind of just like we were talking about before. What do you think?
Yes, very consistent. I'm happy because I feel like this might actually be our main idea. We have to keep reading, but yeah, it looks good.
Yeah. Okay, while a supportive environment is perhaps most critical for the frail and disabled elderly, they argue, all older people benefit when their surroundings enable them to maintain work and community roles and extend their activity beyond their immediate living quarters. Okay, so we're starting to get I feel like we're starting to get closer to maybe another idea. We're not just saying, "Hey, one size doesn't fit all." It sounds like we're starting to walk into, "Hey, this is why," right? Like this is maybe how we're not supporting elderly individuals right now. Like it seems like they need more. They need work and community roles, and they need more from their place of living. I feel like it's not super direct yet, but I sense that we might be moving towards another argument. We're
Right.
gonna have to find out.
Right. For now, I feel like it is consistent with the same, that they don't need the same need. They don't have the same needs, right? They have different things going on. But let's see what exactly the author might want to consider. Okay.
Yeah, definitely still in alignment for now. The next sentence says architects must think of housing the elderly in terms of giving them residential spaces. Okay, residential space, I'm thinking like a house or like a home or an apartment or something like that, um, where you have neighbors and you've got a community, right? Like that's a pretty short and sweet sentence. And I feel like, especially given the context before about, we want them to have work and community roles and have more than just a place to sleep. I feel like this feels more like an argument. What do you think?
Absolutely must think. Must makes it seem like the author really cares about this, right?
Hmm.
And this is an opinion because maybe architects don't have to think this way, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that architects must think of elderly housing as giving them residential space. I don't understand what residential space really means, right? But that doesn't matter because if the author cares deeply about it, they're going to expand on it, right? They're going to explain the definition of it. So for now, I know that they don't have the same needs and they need residential space. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay. Experts in the field contend that the most commonly experienced effects of aging, reduced visual acuity, hearing, tactile sensitivity, strength, and agility, can all be mitigated by sensitive design. Okay, so it sounds like we're talking about design and how these things should be designed. I feel like this is still consistent with, the design of the space and again, kind of the one size fits all not being true, right? Like you can address some of these things with design. I feel like I'm not gonna worry too much about this last sentence, but I know that we're commenting on design and maybe design should be more intentional, giving them a space that works for them, a
Yeah.
residential space that works.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a good context, right? Reduced visual acuity, hearing, tactile, like all this I can visualize, right? As a part of residential space. So I'm not worried about it. I feel like I get what's going on to some extent and I'm good.
Yeah.
So this paragraph really is focused on this new idea that elderly housing um, should focus on giving them residential space, right? So I
Yeah.
was hoping for the idea to repeat. It's not exactly the same idea. Um, if I had to guess what is the main idea, it's probably the second idea of the second paragraph. But
Mhm.
let's keep reading, see what the author really cares about.
Yeah. Okay, this is P4 now. Architects around the country must take the lead in urging local jurisdictions to rethink rules and regulations that constrain creativity and discourage experimentation in age-related design or aging-related design. Okay, so we get another must. It sounds like we're saying that the architects should be questioning, right, the rules and regulations. So we should do things differently. Okay. I we've already been establishing what architects must do, right? They need to think in terms of residential spaces. Um, Here, I'm not sure if this is exactly in line, if this is offering anything new. I would keep reading.
Yeah, I
Again,
would
we've
keep,
already
yeah.
been giving call to actions to architects. So I would keep reading and see if this is supposed to be new or the same.
Yeah, I don't know if this is related to residential spaces or not, right? Because I mean,
Right.
it did say experts need to do this, architects need to do that. It's all following the same kind of pattern. So I don't know if this is distinctly new, right? Because I could blanket this into residential space or I could keep it distinct, but it doesn't seem distinct because of the previous paragraph, the last sentence. So I have to see if they're really going to be focused on rules and regulations more or if this is just one of the things that makes residential spaces more open, more giving, right? So let's see.
Yeah. In many cities with single-use zoning, nursing homes are not even permitted to be constructed in residential areas, even though they are largely residential in function. Okay. So we're back on residential and residential. Again, I'm not sure if we're still gonna stick to this idea of rules. Um, we did just say though in our last sentence, our last argument was that we need to think of housing the elderly in terms of giving them residential spaces. So
Yeah, seems
it's
like the same thing, but let's keep going and see for sure.
yeah. Um, Okay, and this is a quote. Anytime housing for the elderly includes healthcare, the codes treat it as an institution first and housing second, observes
Mm.
architect Martin H. Cohen of Design for Aging Specialist from Armonk, New York. Okay, so we're talking about Cohen's idea, and it sounds like we are less focused on it being residential if we include healthcare.
I
So,
get this now. Residential spaces is basically a distinction from institutionalized healthcare,
yeah,
right? That's what is this is saying. So I think this is all consistent with the previous paragraph. It's just expanding on it more, and it does support it by Cohen in this case.
yeah.
That
Okay, last sentence, and this is a quote again, so probably from Cohen. It's difficult to make a home out of a hospital. I feel like that last sentence especially ties back to earlier, right?
right,
Like it's difficult to make a home out of the hospital. That kind of implies that the goal is to make a home,
right,
right? And
right,
therefore, that's how we should be thinking about it is making these feel like a home, right?
right.
Or making it
Residential.
possible to make a home. Yeah, like a
Right.
residence.
Yeah, that's great. Now I get it. Now I fully understand what residential spaces mean. Thank you, author, whoever you are. This paragraph gave us a lot of clarity, and I think we found our main idea, right?
Yeah.
Because this idea has now repeated in paragraph 3 and 4, right? That architects must, very, very demanding, right? Very direct, must think of elderly housing as giving them residential space, not some sort of institutionalized healthcare kind of thing. I think that's the dichotomy. And you usually find a competing theme in most CARS passages. And in this case, the author really doesn't like this idea of institutionalized healthcare kind of communities, right? They prefer whoever the author is or authors are, they prefer more residential kind of communities.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. P5. Architects are also learning more about design for aging by studying successful projects undertaken by architects in Finland, Sweden, Denmark, and other Northern European countries, and by meeting extensively with potential users. Okay, it sounds like we're studying and hopefully getting better. Sounds good. I don't know that that's a an argument about who they're meeting with, but again, hopefully they're trying to get better because the author definitely feels they should try and get better. I would keep reading and see what they're studying, like what they're trying to improve in, if it aligns or not. But we get that they're trying, it sounds like. Able-bodied architects are spending time in wheelchairs to learn firsthand what it's like to live with physical impairments. Wow, so they really are trying to understand their I almost said patients, not patients, clients, their residents.
Right.
Um, they're trying to get to know the the experience better, hopefully to better serve them.
Right.
Um,
Maybe to
okay, many,
build better residential spaces, right? So it
yeah,
seems consistent with the previous two paragraphs.
yeah.
Good.
Um, yeah, and many are also paying more attention to the therapeutic benefits of outdoor spaces. Yeah, so it seems like it's all trying to better serve their population, right? How do I design spaces that make sense for these individuals, um, so that they could actually thrive? And it comes from understanding what their experience is. Um, Last sentence here in P5 says these steps allow them to design spaces for the elderly that are better tailored to how they live. Okay, I feel like that really drew it right back to what we were talking about before, right?
Yeah.
They're doing this, they're spending time outdoors, or they're spending time in wheelchairs and they're exploring outdoor spaces, whatever. These are brought up almost as examples of how we need to design spaces that are residential spaces for the elderly, right? That are tailored to how they live. So they're specific for their particular residents.
Right.
I think we do have a main idea, Jack. I think you're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. The last three paragraphs have been very nice to us. So now we understand it very well. They gave us a lot of context, a lot of people supporting the same idea. So yeah. Well, at least one person, right? Cohen. I think maybe they brought up another person earlier.
Yeah, Rignier
Um,
in paragraph two, but
right,
that
right.
wasn't technically with residential spaces.
That wasn't. Yeah. So in this case, only one person has been supporting this idea so far. So yeah.
Perfect. All right, one paragraph left. It says, but the single greatest reform, or the greatest single reform would come, experts say, if more architects simply changed their attitudes about design for aging and began to regard the entire field as service enriched housing rather than institutionalized healthcare.
Oh,
Oh,
there we go.
okay. I mean, we said but, and we're clarifying what would be the greatest reform. I don't think this is but like, hey, I'm going to say the opposite thing now. It's
It's
like
so hard to know. Like, how do you know when a contrast word is like changing gears versus just being used in a way to conversate about the same idea? How,
that's
how do
such
I,
a good that's
yeah,
such a good question. I always visualize the argument as like a road, like just a single straight road. And if
yeah,
you are still moving in the same direction, you're just going straight.
right,
Pretty much anytime there's a but, you at least have a little swerve. It could either just be like a little bend in the road and you go
right,
back to where you're at. It could be a left turn, it could be a U-turn, right? Like
yeah,
you're
yeah,
changing. In this case, this but, we're saying but the single greatest reform. We've already been talking about reform. So
yeah,
this reform is still going straight along that road.
yeah,
Here we have
maybe,
a
yeah,
but in this case, it's just a little bend and we're coming right back. We're just clarifying what would be the biggest reform. We're still saying reforms are necessary and we are reforming, etc. It's the same overall direction if you zoom out and look at your, road, your highway, whatever you're on.
yeah. Yeah, no, you're kind of on like a elevated ramp here, right? You're going in the
Yeah.
same direction, but you're kind of elevating to what the author cares most about. And but it's not a U-turn. It's not a complete 180, right? It's still on the same in the same kind of lines. And you would expect that, especially in the last paragraph. Like, why would the author change gears now? Right? Like that wouldn't make sense. So yeah, I mean, because sometimes contrast words are just there to help clarify what the author cares more deeply about within the same realm, right? And that's what's going on here. So great.
Absolutely. Okay, that one change in mindset would free them to experiment in ways they can't do with more formulaic healthcare design. Okay, so again, this is why it's the strongest reform, the greatest reform. It's because it opens up more doors. Basically, it allows you to better serve your elderly population. Pretty consistent still with what we were talking about. Okay, last sentence of the passage. This went by so fast.
Right.
And it's a quote. It's residential with services, not healthcare with decorating, end quote. Stresses Bradford Perkins, partner of Perkins Eastman Architects. Okay, so there you go, right? It's residential with services, not healthcare with decorating. So this is very directly supporting the idea that architects must think of elderly housing as giving them residential spaces, right? It's residential with services, not healthcare with decorating. That's
Right.
about as strong as we can get. Mr. Perkins agrees with this or
Exactly.
agrees with the author.
Right. Perkins and Cohen have agreed to the same idea, but this is a little bit more specific, but still along the same lines, right? That dichotomy, that distinct competing argument of should it be healthcare institutionalized? Should it be more residential? In this case, the author is favoring residential by far, right? In a pretty extreme way, must, right? Like
Yes.
there's no exception here, right? So yeah, great. I think we found our main idea and that was nice and easy.
Yeah. And again, the tone has been very consistent and very strong as well in this passage with the word choice that they're using. Again, tone's not just the actual argument itself, it's how they phrase their argument. It tells them or tells us how strong they feel about it. This has been very clear, right? Negative towards the way that things are currently being done for elderly population and elderly housing. And we kind of have an idea of how this could be better, is if we think about it with residential design. So we've got our main idea, we've got our tone. I think we're ready for the questions.
Awesome.
So
All
yeah,
right.
so if you're listening to this, we just finished P6, and we know what our main idea is. There are 6 questions associated with this passage. We encourage you to click on the link that's in the description so that you could pull open this passage on your computer or your phone or whatever. Give these questions a try. You now have the benefit of having a solid understanding of the passage. So it's a great way to test your critical thinking skills and your CARS question approach skills. So, highly recommend. Um, and we hope you enjoyed our episode for today. Make sure to catch us in our next one, in our next CARS Reading Skills Workshop. We've been doing these every week for, gosh, several months now. So we hope you enjoy it. We hope to catch you in the next one. In the meantime, happy studying and have a lovely rest of your day.